The January wind in New Hampshire doesn't just blow, it bites. It's a dry, persistent cold that rattles the window panes of this old Victorian I've called home for 40 years. I was sitting in my favorite armchair, the one with the floral slipcover that hides the worn springs, clutching a mug of Earl Grey. Outside, the world was a study in grayscale, slate skies, skeletal oaks, and the pristine, treacherous white of last night's blizzard. I'm Martha. I'm 72, a widow, and according to my son David, a bit of a hoarder of memories. I like my knickknacks. I like the scratches on the baseboards from when David and his daughter, my granddaughter Lily, used to measure their height in the pantry. These walls aren't just wood and plaster, they're the diary of my life. "Mom, did you hear a word I said?" I blinked, pulling my gaze from the snowdrift burying the bird feeder. David was standing in the kitchen doorway, his face pinched. He looked older than 38. Beside him stood his wife, Chloe. She was scrolling on her phone, her manicured thumb moving with mechanical precision. "I heard you, honey," I said softly. "You said Chloe's business venture hit a snag." "A snag?" David's voice rose an octave. "Mom, it's $500,000. The investors are threatening to sue. If we don't settle the debt, they'll go after our cars, our credit, everything. We're underwater." I looked at Chloe. She didn't look like a woman drowning. She looked like a woman waiting for a check. This venture was a luxury skincare line that, as far as I could tell, consisted mostly of expensive packaging and influencer retreats in Tulum. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and I truly was. "But David, I'm on a fixed income. Your father's pension and my Social Security cover the taxes and the heat. I don't have $500,000. David stepped into the living room. He didn't sit down. "You have the house, Mom. It's unencumbered. The market is peaking even in winter. If you take out a reverse mortgage, or better yet, sell it, and move into that nice assisted living place near the mall, we can clear the debt and have enough left to get us back on our feet." The tea in my mouth turned bitter. "Sell my home? Where am I supposed to go, David? This is where your father's spirit is. This is where you grew up." Chloe finally looked up, her eyes cold as the New England frost. "Martha, let's be realistic. This house is a money pit. You can't even shovel the driveway yourself anymore. You're being selfish holding on to these dusty rooms while your son's future is collapsing." "Selfish?" I whispered. "If you don't do this," David said, his voice dropping to a hard, clinical tone I didn't recognize, "I can't justify spending my weekends over here fixing your plumbing or hauling your groceries. If you won't help your family when it matters, then maybe you should see how well you manage on your own. We'll have to reconsider our living arrangements. Maybe it's time we move to Florida and start over without the baggage." The baggage. That was me. They left an hour later, leaving behind a silence so heavy I could feel it in my bones. I didn't cry. When you've lived through 72 Januaries, you learn that crying doesn't melt the ice. I spent the next 3 days going through the motions. I made my oatmeal. I watched the evening news. I talked to my daughter Sarah, who lives in Seattle. I didn't tell her about David's ultimatum. Sarah has her own struggles. 3 kids and a husband who just got laid off. I couldn't add my weight to her shoulders. But as I walked through the rooms, looking at the photos of David as a toddler, as a graduate, as a groom, I realized something. My son didn't see me anymore. He saw an ATM with a roof. He saw a liability. On Thursday, the local handyman Pete came by to plow the drive. "Morning, Martha. Bitter one today," he shouted, his breath blooming like white smoke. "It is, Pete. Say, do you saint. I'll have that brother-in-law in the moving business? The one with the climate-controlled storage?" Pete paused, leaning on his shovel. "Sure do. Why? You finally getting rid of that old piano?" "No," I said, a strange sparks and gasoline feeling rising in my chest. "I'm getting rid of everything." The plan formed with the clarity of a winter morning. If David wanted the house so badly, he could have it, but he wouldn't have me, and he certainly wouldn't have the equity he thought was his for the taking. I called a real estate lawyer, an old friend of my late husband's. "Arthur," I said, "I want to put the house into an irrevocable trust, today. And I want the beneficiary to be the local historical society effective upon my death or departure." Then I started packing. Not the furniture, not the heavy things. I packed the things that mattered. The letters my husband wrote me from the Navy, the handmade ornaments the grandkids made, my grandmother's cast-iron skillet, and my journals. I called my sister Eleanor, who lives in a tiny, sun-drenched cottage in Savannah, Georgia. "Ellie, is that guest room still painted? That hideous seafoam green?" "It is," she laughed. "Why?" "I think I'd like to see it. for a long time. The following Tuesday was the coldest day of the year. I waited until I knew David was at work. I left the spare key under the mat, just like always. But I left something else on the kitchen island. It wasn't a check, it wasn't a deed, it was a stack of envelopes. 24 of them, one for every year of David's life that I had supported him, bailed him out, or paid for his mistakes, from the broken window in grade school to the college tuition he wasted by switching majors 4 times. Inside each envelope wasn't money, but a paid-in-full receipt I'd mocked up, detailing exactly how much I had already given. At the bottom of the pile was a final note. David, you told me to pay Chloe's debt, or get out. I've chosen the latter. The house is no longer mine to sell. I've handed the keys to the Historical Society. They'll be turning this into a local landmark museum by spring. You are welcome to visit the exhibits during public hours. I've spent my life making sure you had a home. Now I'm going to spend the rest of it making sure I have a life. Don't look for me. I'm not baggage anymore. I'm a traveler. Love, Mom. I watched the Welcome to New Hampshire sign fade in the rearview mirror of my old Subaru. My car was packed to the roof. My heart was thumping in a way I hadn't felt since my honeymoon. I stopped at a diner just across the Massachusetts border. The smell of frying bacon and cheap coffee felt like a hug. I sat in a booth and ordered a slice of blueberry pie, the kind with the lattice crust. As I ate, my phone began to buzz. David was calling, then Chloe, then David again. I didn't open the messages. Not yet. I wanted to savor the taste of the pie first. I wanted to feel the heater humming against my ankles. For the first time in years, I wasn't Martha the widow or Martha the mother. I was just Martha. I reached Georgia 3 days later. The air changed from a sharp blade to a soft velvet. The Spanish moss hanging from the oaks in Savannah looked like gray lace. Eleanor was waiting on her porch with 2 glasses of iced tea, even though it was only 55 degrees. She hugged me so hard I thought my ribs might crack. You actually did it, she whispered. You disappeared. I didn't disappear, Ellie, I said, looking up at the clear southern sky. I just moved out of the way. Life in Savannah is different. My joints don't ache as much. I spend my mornings volunteering at a local literacy center. I eventually called Sarah. She cried, then she laughed, then she told me she was proud of me. As for David, he finally reached me through Sarah. He didn't apologize, not at first. He ranted about the legal nightmare of the trust. He told me Chloe left him when she realized the house-mon. I wasn't coming. I listened to him for a long time. I didn't get angry. I didn't offer a penny. David, I said, watching a cardinal land on Ellie's bird bath, the debt you owe isn't to the investors, it's to yourself. You traded your mother for a dream that didn't belong to you. When you figure out how to pay that back, give me a call. I hung up and felt a strange sense of peace. The January thaw had arrived, even in my heart. But yesterday a letter arrived. It wasn't from David. It was a thick, cream-colored envelope with no return address, postmarked from my old town in New Hampshire. Inside was a single skeleton key, not to my house but to a safety deposit box I didn't know existed, and a photograph of my husband, taken a week before he passed, holding a legal document I had never seen. On the back, in his shaky handwriting, it said, "For when the winter gets too cold, Martha. Use this only when you're truly alone." My breath hitched. My husband had been gone for 10 years. What had he hidden, and why was it being sent to me now, hundreds of miles away, by someone who clearly knew exactly where I had disappeared to? I looked at the key glinting in the Georgia sun. The past wasn't done with me yet. The skeleton key felt heavy, a cold weight from a past I thought I'd tucked away. I drove back to New Hampshire that spring, not as a woman being kicked out, but as one reclaiming her narrative. The safety deposit box held more than just papers. It held a life insurance policy and a deed to a small cabin in the White Mountains, one my husband Henry had bought in secret years ago. For your peace, his final letter read. He had known, even then, that David's greed might one day outpace his heart. I didn't give the cabin to David, nor did I use it to pay Chloe's debt. I sold it and used the funds to establish a scholarship for single mothers in our town, ensuring that other women wouldn't have to choose between their homes and their children's mistakes. As I stood on the porch of my old Victorian, now a museum filled with the history of others, David approached me. He looked humbled, weary, and finally, for the first time, sorry. I didn't move back in, and I didn't hand him a check. I simply handed him a brochure for the museum. "History is for learning, David," I said, a soft breeze catching my hair. "I hope you finally start reading the chapters I've already written." I turned toward my car, heading back to the warmth of Savannah, leaving the winter behind for good.